April 13, 1945, near the Dutch city of Zwolle. The Canadian officer looked at the two soldiers standing before him. The city was a fortress, garrisoned by over 1,000 elite German SS troops. The planned Allied artillery barrage to soften them up would be devastating, not just to the Germans but to the historic city and the thousands of Dutch civilians trapped inside. The officer needed intelligence. He needed a volunteer for a suicide mission, a two-man reconnaissance patrol to sneak into the city, assess the enemy's strength, and report back. 2 men volunteered. One was Corporal Willie Arsenault. The other was a man who was already a legend in the Canadian Army, a man so feared by the Germans they called him the Ghost. He was Private Leo Major. Major had a fearsome reputation, but he was not an imposing figure. He was short, wiry, and wore a patch over his left eye, having lost it to a phosphorus grenade in Normandy. He was half blind, but he saw the battlefield with a clarity that sighted men lacked. As he and Arsenault prepared to move out under the cover of darkness, his commanding officer gave him a simple order. "Leo, just find out where they are. Do not start a fight." Leo Major just grinned. For a man like him, that was an order that was impossible to follow. What happened over the next 10 hours would defy every known principle of modern warfare. It would become an event so unbelievable, so saturated with impossible courage, that military historians still struggle to comprehend it. By sunrise the next morning, the German garrison of Zwolle would be in full retreat. The city would be liberated. And it would all be the work of a single one-eyed French-Canadian soldier who decided that waiting for an army to do the job was simply too slow. This is the story of how one man, armed with a submachine gun and an inexhaustible supply of rage, single-handedly fought and tricked an entire German army into surrendering a city. To understand the man, you have to understand his fury. Leo Major was not just a soldier, he was a vessel for pure, distilled aggression. Born in Massachusetts to French-Canadian parents, he had enlisted in the Canadian Army in 1940. From the start, he was a problem. He was insubordinate, disdainful of authority, and fought with his fellow soldiers as often as he trained with them. But on the battlefield, his rage became a superpower. In Normandy during the D-Day landings, he single-handedly captured a German Hanomag half-track, killing its crew. A few days later, during a fight with an elite SS patrol, a phosphorus grenade exploded in front of his face, permanently blinding him in his left eye. Any other soldier would have been sent home. The army doctors told him the war was over for him. Leo Major refused. He argued that he only needed one eye to sight a rifle. He was a sniper, he told them, and now he could close one eye without even trying. His stubbornness was so absolute, his will to fight so undeniable, that the army relented. He was allowed to return to the front. He put a pirate-like patch over his ruined eye and went back to the one thing he did best: hunting Germans. Months later, during the Battle of the Scheldt, he was in a truck that hit a landmine. The explosion threw him through the air, breaking his back in 3 places, shattering both ankles, and cracking 4 ribs. The doctors again told him his war was over. He was sent to a hospital in England. A few weeks later, he escaped. He hitched a ride with a passing military family and made his way back to his unit in the Netherlands, just in time for the final push into Germany. He was in constant pain, half-blind, and officially a deserter from a hospital, and he was about to perform the single greatest feat of arms of any soldier in the entire war. As night fell on April 13th, Leo Major and his best friend, Willie Arsenault, slipped across the canal and into the outskirts of Zwolle. Their mission was simple recon, but within minutes, their mission turned to tragedy. A German sentry spotted Arsenault's movement. A burst of machine gun fire cut through the darkness and Willie Arsenault fell, mortally wounded. Leo Major rushed to his side, but it was too late. His best and only friend was dead. He killed the 2 Germans who had shot Willie, but it wasn't enough. In that moment, something inside Leo Major broke. The grief and the rage fused together into a cold, white-hot fury. His mission was no longer about reconnaissance. It was now about vengeance. The entire German army in Zwolle was going to pay for what they did to his friend. He took Arsenault's submachine gun and grenades, grabbed his own, and walked into the city alone. The mathematics of the situation were insane. One man with one good eye, against more than 1,000 battle-hardened SS and Wehrmacht soldiers. Any sane person would have retreated. But Leo Major was not sane. He was possessed. He devised a plan that was part military genius, part sheer madness. He would not fight the German army. He would become a ghost. He would convince the 1,000-man garrison that they were not being attacked by a single soldier, but by the entire Canadian army. He began running through the quiet streets of the city, from building to building, his pockets stuffed with grenades, a submachine gun in each hand. He would fire a burst from one gun, toss a grenade, then sprint through a backyard or an alley to another street and repeat the process. He created a storm of noise and chaos, the sound of his Sten guns echoing off the buildings, the explosions of his grenades making it sound like a full-scale assault was underway. He was everywhere at once, a phantom of violence moving through the shadows. The Germans in their barracks and defensive positions were thrown into total confusion. They were hearing gunfire and explosions from all directions. They had no idea where the attack was coming from or how many men were involved. They believed the Canadian army was already inside their walls. For hours, Leo Major waged his one-man war against the city of Zwolle. His goal was not to kill every German, but to sow chaos and terror. He ran through the darkness like a demon, a whirlwind of sound and fury. At one point, he burst into a tavern to find a group of German officers drinking, completely unaware of the attack happening outside. He disarmed them, took the officer in charge prisoner, and discovered something crucial. The officer spoke perfect French. Leo Major, a native French-Canadian, now had an advantage. He handed his prisoner one of the submachine guns. "You're going to come with me," he ordered in French. "We're going to go around to every German position, and you are going to tell them that the Canadian army is here in overwhelming force, and that if they don't surrender by morning, they will all be annihilated." The terrified German officer had no choice but to comply. Leo Major, the one-eyed ghost, marched his prisoner from garrison to garrison, from checkpoint to checkpoint. The officer would shout the surrender terms, his voice shaking with fear, while Leo stood behind him in the shadows, a silent, menacing presence. The German soldiers, already unnerved by the constant explosions and gunfire, saw one of their own officers telling them the situation was hopeless. The psychological impact was devastating. The myth of the Canadian invasion was becoming a reality in their minds. But Leo Major's night of rage was far from over. He found the local Gestapo headquarters. Kicking down the door, he engaged in a furious firefight, killing 4 SS officers. He found another group of SS officers and forced them to surrender. By now, he had taken nearly a dozen prisoners. He marched his growing collection of captives back towards the Canadian lines, forcing them to carry the body of his fallen friend, Willie Arsenault. After handing over his prisoners, he refused to rest. He grabbed more grenades, more ammunition, and turned back towards the city. His work was not done. For the rest of the night, Leo Major continued his relentless, one-man psychological operation. He found the SS headquarters and, using a captured German Panzerfaust, set the building on fire. The sight of their own headquarters burning to the ground was the final nail in the coffin for the German garrison's morale. The fire, visible from all over the city, was a giant, burning signal that their command structure had collapsed. The chaos was total. German soldiers, convinced they were surrounded by thousands of Canadians, began to panic. They saw shadows in every alley, heard enemies behind every door. They were not fighting an army. They were fighting the fear that Leo Major had planted in their minds. He had created what military theorists call a feedback loop of terror. The noise he made caused confusion. The confusion caused panic. The panic caused soldiers to fire randomly into the darkness, which created even more noise and confusion. He had turned the German garrison against itself. They were effectively fighting ghosts and losing. By 4:30 in the morning, the German commander of Zwolle had seen enough. Believing his position was completely untenable, and that he was facing a massive division-sized attack, he gave the order for a general retreat. As the sun began to rise over the city of Zwolle, a strange and wonderful thing happened. The citizens, who had been hiding in their cellars, heard the sudden silence. Cautiously, they began to emerge into the streets. They saw no Canadian army. They saw no columns of tanks or legions of soldiers. All they saw were the burning remnants of the German occupation and the signs of a hasty retreat. And then they saw him. A single, exhausted, one-eyed Canadian soldier walking down the main street. It was Léo Major. He had done it. He had single-handedly liberated a city of 50,000 people. He had chased out an army of 1,000 men. When the Régiment de la Chaudière, his unit, finally entered the city later that morning, they were not met with gunfire but with cheering crowds. The Dutch civilians were celebrating their liberation, a liberation they owed not to an army, but to the impossible courage of one man. The commanding officers of the Canadian Army were stunned. The logistics were impossible. The numbers didn't make sense. They had been preparing for a bloody multi-day siege. Instead, the city had fallen without a single Allied casualty after Léo Major entered it. When they found him, he was exhausted, grieving, but triumphant. For his actions, he was recommended for the Distinguished Conduct Medal, the second highest award for bravery in the Commonwealth. But Léo Major, in a move that perfectly defined his character, refused the medal. Why? Because, he said, the man presenting it, Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery, was incompetent and, in his opinion, not qualified to award him anything. He simply did not care about medals or glory. He had done what he did for his friend. That was all the reward he needed. This was not the end of his story. After liberating Zwolle, his war continued. A few weeks later, he was fighting in another town when a building exploded, throwing him into the air and breaking his back again. He would eventually be sent home. But his story doesn't even end there. When the Korean War broke out in 1950, Léo Major, the man who had been declared unfit for service, who had broken his back twice, and who had one eye, volunteered again. In Korea, his legend only grew. In November of 1951, he led a small scout team of 18 men to recapture Hill 355, a strategic position held by thousands of Chinese soldiers. For 2 days, under relentless mortar and machine gun fire, he and his men fought their way up the hill, holding off counterattack after counterattack. They succeeded in taking the hill from an enemy that outnumbered them more than 100 to 1. For this action, he was awarded another Distinguished Conduct Medal. He became one of only 3 Canadian soldiers in history to receive the DCM in 2 different wars. The man who refused a medal for liberating a city by himself had now earned another one for capturing a hill by himself. Léo Major's story is one that defies belief. It is a story of what one human being, fueled by a combination of grief, rage, and an unbreakable will, is capable of achieving. He was not a perfect soldier in the traditional sense. He was a troublemaker, a rule breaker, a man who despised authority. But he was the very definition of a warrior. He represented the untamable spirit that armies both fear and desperately need. He was the chaos element, the unpredictable variable that can shatter the most well-laid plans of an enemy. When the German army occupied Zwolle, they saw it in terms of numbers. They had 1,000 soldiers, fortified positions, and superior firepower. They had calculated the odds. What they couldn't calculate was Léo Major. They couldn't put his grief into a logistical equation. They couldn't factor his rage into their defensive strategy. He was a force of nature that broke their mathematics of war. He did not defeat them with superior tactics or overwhelming force. He defeated them by becoming a ghost in their minds. He made them believe in an army that wasn't there, and they fled from a figment of their own terrorized imaginations. Today in the city of Zwolle, Léo Major is a hero. A street is named after him, the Léo Majorlaan. He is remembered as their liberator. His story is taught to school children, a modern-day fairy tale of a one-eyed giant who chased an army of monsters out of their town. It serves as a powerful reminder that history is not only shaped by great armies and sweeping strategies, it is also shaped by the singular actions of extraordinary individuals. Leo Major was not just a soldier. He was a testament to the fact that sometimes all it takes is one man with one good eye and a heart full of fire to change the world. He was the one-man army, the ghost of Zwolle, and a legend who will never be forgotten.